Hey, you. Yeah, you. What you doing? I know what I'm doing. I'm starting my week off right with Talking About the Blues podcast, baby.
What's going on? What's going on? You are now bluesing with the #1 blues broadcast in New York City. Talking about the blues, baby. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Instagram, like the Facebook page, and subscribe to the website. Stay tuned for our live interviews, baby. Keep What's going on, good folks? You know what it is. We are now bluesing. We're talking about the blues. And I have a filmmaker today. This filmmaker has a very important story to tell. He teamed up with actually another friend of mine out of the blues community, Aaron Pritchard. We are speaking today with Patrick Branson. What's going on, my man?
What's going on?
We are bluesing, and based on your documentary, you bluesing too.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about this documentary, and then I want to know about your blues journey. Share with us what this story is about.
Well, the movie's called America's Blues, and we wanted to make kind of take a different look at the blues as to what's been made, what's been out there about the blues, the other kind of movies that are mostly historical or about blues musicians or live music. And what we did is we took it from an aspect of how it's affected and impacted popular culture. You know, and that's anything from different genres of music to art to fashion. We talk about how it's influenced film and television. And we even get into how, you know, it has really the kind of starting point for the sexual liberation in America.
Okay, so just so I could make sure I'm clear, what you're saying is you wanted to go past the norm of how everybody covers this music and heritage and give a different, not even a different spin, but you wanted to show a history of it that really isn't discussed.
Yes, we wanted to show that the blues is a lot more than just where rock and roll came from. You know, we wanted to show that the blues is actually where all American music came from, and also where a lot of the things that we use in our popular culture today come from, and we don't even really realize it. Like a lot of the words that we use and the clothing that a lot of entertainers wear, they're mimicking these old blues guys. Now, they may have taken a modern spin on it and updated it, but, you know, as with everything, it evolves.
Right.
But it came from them, you know, and the early blues guys when it was starting to get recorded and they started touring.
So
a lot of stuff comes from that people don't even really realize. And we kind of focus on education in the film.
Right.
You know, and we think it's important. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that this film is really about is that the blues should be taught in the history books because it's a whole lot more important to our to what we are now as a country than it's given credit for.
Well, you know what? I'll take it a step further and be extremely specific. It's very important in race relations, especially with the current climate we're in.
Absolutely.
You know,
people don't realize that the music brought people together before there ever was civil rights movement.
You know, which is it's ironic, not funny, but Old Negro Spirituals, Prison Songs, which is the blues without the guitar and harmonica, was the soundtrack to the civil rights movement. So that does say a lot, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now with that being said, just, you know, and just for shits and giggles, would you say that the original traveling blues artists were like the original rock stars?
They most definitely were the original rock stars. And a lot of them, you know, because of the conditions that they grew up in, they didn't have, you know, very expensive taste, and they didn't get paid a lot of money anyways, but, you know, most of them just drank, and they did exactly, really, the rock stars are modeled off of them. I mean, you can just really see it pretty blatantly between, Keith Richards and John Lee Hooker.
Oh, man. You named...
I mean, those two are really pretty much the same dude.
Yeah, you actually named two of, if not the greatest, two of the 5 top greatest guitarists. So now, with that being said, because first and foremost, I saw the documentary, and it definitely gets talking about the blues, stamp of approval. It covered so many things, and I remember asking Aaron this before, and I'll ask you, well, I don't have to ask you because I saw it, but I asked him, there's some things about the blues that a lot of people don't wish to discuss, right? And you mentioned it in terms of the climate these artists came out of, and you guys dove headfirst right into that and spoke deeply about it.
Well, I think it was important to, not beat around the bush and just be completely honest about everything. And, it's true. People don't want to talk about the blues, and that's why it's probably overlooked so much in the history books and in our, cultural history of the United States, because they don't want to remember that. They want to be like, oh, well, that wasn't us.
Right.
But it's really only about 100 and something years ago. So it is. But that's the problem, is they're always looking at the negative about it. But think about what the blues gave us, and then you can kind of see it as a more positive spin. Yes, those were trying times, and it was terrible things that were happening to these people. But this is their story. I mean, their story wasn't being written in history books. So the music was their story. The music is their history.
Right.
And it's a part of American history. I don't think it's just a part of African American history. And I think one quote from the movie that, you don't have to pull it up or anything, but one quote from the movie was where Morgan Freeman, we found a clip of Morgan Freeman, and anybody can find this on where he's talking about
YouTube, yes.
Black History Month. And Morgan Freeman says, I don't want a Black History Month because Black history is American history. And that's really what it comes down to, is we need to stop separating the two.
Well, you're right, because American history basically was built off the labor of African history, and then by second, third generation African, they became African American, and I believe that hyphen African American was to keep it separate. That's my personal belief, but as of this day and age, and it should have been long before that, we are American. Everybody here, that's their blood, their sweat, their family lineage in this country is American, and that music came from American experiences. So with that being...
Absolutely.
Yeah, so now with that being said, you spoke to a lot of people. Now, before... I want to sidestep from what it's about and your motivation to tell this story, and I want to talk about filmmaking. Right? I would like to know, how long did it take for you guys to put this together? And first, actually, before we get into all that, you produced and directed, correct? I
produced, directed, shot it, edited. Everything.
Oh, all right. So you did the real filmmaker thing. I get it. I dig it. And I
made a movie.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So okay. So let's not give you titles and just say you're a filmmaker.
Right.
Okay. So with that being said, let's talk about the process. First and foremost, how long was the process?
Well, in the beginning of this process, when me and Aaron got together, I did a little documentary for him and his nonprofit, and that's kind of how we got to talking about this one. And we didn't have the money. It took us a little while to get the money together to actually buy the equipment and stuff. And once we got the equipment, though, everything just kind of fell into place. There was only a couple of trips that were far enough to where we had to, have a crowdfunding campaign and raise some money to fly there. Mm-hmm. But everything else, Mississippi and I'm in St. Louis, so Mississippi and Memphis and Chicago are just 5 or 6 hours away. So once we actually got the equipment, it only took us a year and a half to produce it and have a rough cut.
Nice.
So I mean, altogether, it took me about, but the process is never over, really. After that, you're continuing to work on it while you work on your next film. I've got another project I've started, but I'm still working on the blues, setting up a tour. We're going to take it on a theatrical tour, and I've secured broadcast representation, international broadcast distribution. So I don't have to worry about that anymore. But then I have to worry about I have to think about how I'm going to release the DVD, where I'm going to put it, and all sorts of fun things that you don't think about when you say, I want to make a movie.
Right.
Well, making a movie is really actually pretty easy.
That's yeah.
It's everything else that goes with it.
Right. Making a movie is fun. Post-production is extremely time-consuming, but the business aspect, the administrative work, that's when you're getting down to the nitty-gritty.
Right. And you as a filmmaker, especially an independent, where we don't have studio money or any money really. We're just, we made a movie off of what we raised and had, and then now I'm going to make another movie off of that, and just kind of off of the profits, and go from there.
That's how you do it.
You wear a lot of hats.
Absolutely.
I'm everything. I'm the marketer. I'm the, press contact. I'm the web designer. I'm, the grant writer. The subtitler. Everything.
That's a lot. And with that being said, I know it was a lot in terms of research, because you guys didn't just grab a camera and haphazardly and randomly pick people to interview and just ask them anything off the top of your head. How's the research process? How did you zone into specifically what you wanted to speak about?
Well, Aaron, my co-producer on this, he is a blues guru and has been studying it since he was 15 years old, and traveling around and visiting grave sites, and his organization, the Killer Blues, that they provide grave sites to people. So he knew a lot of stuff, But even he learned as we went into this, because this we were looking for specific things, and and even he learned some things about our culture that he didn't even really know came from the blues. But as far as the research, we got pretty lucky, man. We found ourselves at a blues symposium in Chicago, and at this symposium there happened to be, doctors, PhDs from all over the country, well-known people that were all there, and we ended up getting 9 interviews,
based on that
2 days.
Wow.
And so that's where we got a big chunk of, the actual information and expert storytelling stories from the film. Outside of that, we went, and tried to get it directly from the mouths of the musicians. We got a couple of the last of the original Delta bluesmen in the film.
Right.
We have some jazz legends that work, and people that work as composers on films, blues musicians. We have, we even have the guy that inspired John Belushi's character in the Blues Brothers.
You absolutely do.
So there was a lot of, I don't think, as far as research, it didn't take us that much research. It really was, I let them tell the story. And I just kind of took what they said and molded it into a science fair volcano.
Right. So now, let me ask you, as the filmmaker of this, what did you take away? What did you learn about the blues, about America, about the struggle of the people that this music came from, that maybe surprised you or opened your eyes to something that you was like, wow, I really didn't even realize?
Well, I learned a lot of different things, you know, especially when you get into, when we got into talking about literature and language and, you know, theater and stuff like that. And, like, there's a whole lot of influence that the blues has had. I mean, look at the number of books written on the myth of Robert Johnson alone.
Right.
Just that one subject. And you can see how far that the reach has stretched. But do people think about, you know, theater or think about books and think that the blues had any influence on that at all? They don't, but they did. But it did, especially with African-American writers in the 1920s.
Absolutely.
You know, the Harlem Renaissance was built on people that were all inspired by the blues. That was a movement back then. And while, we didn't have recordings like we do now, and it wasn't as widespread, it was a movement. It was growing.
I dig it. I dig it. So now, and I believe the purpose of the movie, or your purpose of the movie, is similar to what it's about. But I want to ask you anyway, what made you guys come together and say, this is the story we have to tell?
Well, it kind of happened. Aaron has seen every blues documentary there is. And when I first got with him, you know, we went to school together a long time ago, but when I got back together with him and did this a short documentary on his Killer Blues headstone project, you know, just seeing some of the people that didn't have headstones still and that they were raising money to provide headstones for. I'll give you one example. Some of these people were some of the most influential people in American music, and yet they didn't have enough to even have a headstone put on their grave. They're just laying there under a piece of grass.
Right.
And that really, like, it kind of hurt my feelings. Like, okay, one example is Lonnie Johnson. Lonnie Johnson, a lot of people don't even really know who Lonnie Johnson is. He's from St. Louis, or he played in St. Louis. And Lonnie Johnson is the sole creator of the guitar solo, because before him, the guitar was a rhythm instrument.
Right.
And he kind of was a violin player, picked up the guitar and started using it as a lead instrument. And ever since then, that's what created everything else.
Right.
I mean, you can pretty much pinpoint rock and roll with their sexy guitar solos to Lonnie Johnson.
Absolutely.
And you can watch it evolve into heavy metal and all these other different expressions, and it's just a different way of expressing the same thing.
Absolutely. I dig it.
And that's what drove me and kind of opened my eyes to, boy, this, you know, all these other movies have been made about the history of the blues, but people really still don't give it half the respect that it deserves. And, you know, so that's when we got together and we're like, well, if we're going to make a movie, let's make it different. Let's do something different. You know, how many movies have been made about the blues? At least a couple a year, right?
Right. Whether it's whether it's a narrative or just a documentary about specific musicians, right?
But I mean, so how do you take a genre that's pretty much been beat with a stick, but still, the things that we wanted to talk about, all the different ways that blues influenced our culture, have never been. You know, they might have been touched on here and there, but they've never really been exploited the way that we did, I think.
Right.
I hope.
Well, you know what? There was a gambit, at least from my perspective, there was a gambit of information that first and foremost, before I go into that, let me ask you this. Who was the movie for? Was it for the blues community, or was it to reintroduce the blues to those who don't really get it, whether they care or not, or who's the movie made for?
I mean, obviously, anybody that makes movies is going to tell you, yes, for everybody. But in our case, it is for both the blues community, because a blues lover, I've had quite a few see the film and say they love it, and they even learned things about it that they didn't know. But then it's also for, you know, an introduction to the blues, and I think it will do well. helping to teach the blues and the importance of learning the blues to future generations.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. And now one of the reasons why I asked you that was what I was going to say prior to the question was you whether you're a blues enthusiast, blues musician, or someone who has no clue about this music or its history, what I enjoyed about the film is it touched on music that you would never even think. I mean, it's evident rock and roll came from the blues. That's
right.
That's kind of a given. You know, same thing with rhythm and blues, same thing with doo-wop and all these other musics, you know, funk and to hip-hop. This is all evident. But then to go into songs that you wouldn't even be consciously listening for any type of, whether it's blues structure musically or influenced in stage presence and things of that. And I thought you guys did a good job in bringing that to the table, because now you have, like, for instance, my wife watched the movie with me, and then after watching the movie and then hearing the Annie Lennox song, she was identifying through their video, their clothing, and through the composition, all types of blues influence. So I think you did a good job at bringing up a question or bringing up a situation and allowing people to actively act on it.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that's kind of what we're hoping to do. So, you know, make people kind of think outside the box a little bit and see the connections.
Right. I believe that the film could help people identify it. Now, with that being said, in the climate that we're in, and I don't want to harbor on this too much, but I want to ask you this because, you know, the history of the music, some of the song and some of the content, some of the songs discussed, very, very touchy, you know, and touchy in the fact that people catch high emotions when these things are spoken of, addressed, or whatever the case is. When you guys decided to really bring to the forefront every aspect of this culture and music, did you have any worry or concern about backlash when discussing slavery, Jim Crow, and things of that nature?
Well, not really, because the way that I look at it is that if you can't talk about facts and history, then I think maybe the backlash should be on you, you know? It's a part of the way it was. Why beat around and tell a story that didn't happen? I wanted to tell the story the way it happened. It wasn't always a pretty story, man, but something beautiful came out of it. And I think you can't really fully appreciate it until you see it for what it truly is.
It was everything in life. It
was everything, but it came from pain, and out of that grew something beautiful and something unstoppable. And still today, songs are being influenced by it, and musicians are learning from these old guys that died 70 years ago.
Yeah, some 30 or 40 years ago, for that matter.
Right, and some still alive.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
80, 90-year-old cats, you know. So now you mentioned earlier from the movie that blues also was a catapult to sexual revolution on wax or in music. Explain that.
Well, if you can kind of trace it back in a couple different places, and the movie kind of goes over this, but the sexual revolution it started in, let's say, the 20s with the jazz era, and then again in the 1950s and 60s, and early blues songs like Bessie Smith and Howlin' Wolf, and Howlin' Wolf is a little bit later, but they talked about sex in a way that popular music at the time just didn't.
Right. It was risque at that time.
At that time, yeah. And so that kind of helped, I guess, when the white musicians started covering these songs, that opened the doors for sexuality in music to be expressed a little bit more than it was and be accepted a little bit more. And then as time grew on, that happened more and more. And now we have Now it's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
we might have gone too far.
I kind of
we should probably take the reins back a little bit.
Yeah,
but
dial it down.
now, I mean, think about what they were. Everything was a little proper, and you know, this country was, you know, built from English, right? Settlers.
Right.
And the music in England was real proper and primp, and you know, everything was just, you know, they wore girdles and stuff like that. And then the blues was loose and emotional, and it built off your feelings.
Right.
And so that's how I think it kind of kick-started the sexual revolution, is because it unlocked feelings in people that other music just didn't.
Okay, I dig it.
You know, it allowed them to express themselves in a way that the music before that didn't do that.
I dig it. So how are you guys doing in the festival circuit with this film?
So far, so good. We've screened at, I think, 7 or 8 festivals, and we won 1 award. You know, we're hopeful that we'll get in a couple of more, and then we'll be touring with the film starting. We start in October really, but we're going to Wisconsin in October for a couple of screenings, and then in December, in January and February, all the way through March, I believe we got about maybe 10 cities.
Nice. That
we're going to be taking it to. You know, I'm actually, you know, I'm not really surprised that a movie about the blues didn't win a bunch of awards.
Really?
You know, but I'm less surprised about that. But it's good that we got to screen at so many places and so many people got to see it from all over the country.
Absolutely. What I would like you to explain to our audience, and I have experience with the festival circuit, and I believe I understand why you said that, but I would like you to explain to the audience, which you touched on earlier in our conversation, but just explain to them why you're not surprised a blues film wasn't received on a certain level, please.
Well, it was received very well. We got great reviews. You know, everyone that liked it and that saw it really liked it. I said that I'm just not surprised because, I mean, it's kind of the same thing that we talked about earlier, that people just don't really want to recognize or remember that, especially now because of all the things that are coming to light with the racial tensions and all that. People still want to forget about it.
Turn a blind eye. So if that...
Because it stirs up feelings in them that, you know, hurtful feelings in them. But
well, the truth, yeah, the truth will set you free. And I believe if we all just...
Sometimes the truth hurts, you know?
It has to. You don't grow without hurt.
And so the reason really I kind of said that, and we've been very lucky. We found a distribution, you know, agent and all that. And, you know, we've had a lot of interest in the film. But, you know, if you don't have a pop star in it, and this is what, you know, some of the problems when I first started doing, you know, looking for a distributor, and, you know, some of the responses I got, well, who's in it? And I tell them who's in it, and you know, to me, it's a very impressive cast. I mean, we have Terrence Blanchard, who's, you know, composed, I don't know, 50, 60 films.
Yeah.
And won 5 Grammys. That's a pretty big name in my book, but you know, some of them said that, oh, we don't have any big enough names. And that's kind of, to me, why I said that. I'm not surprised it didn't win any award or win many awards. We won 1 award.
Right,
so
right.
It's because people really, they view things in that way. Like, oh, well, even though it's telling a story, it's not telling a story about the boy bands or, you know, or pop music or...
Right.
You know, something that they're more familiar with. It's telling a story of how those things came to light, but there's nobody that they really recognize in it as a superstar, so they kind of dismiss it.
Right. They downplay... I'm going to call it like I see it.
And it's the same thing that's been happening to the blues for ages.
Right. They downplay real music.
The blues has been downplayed and then replaced by rock and roll as the, you know, source of all things. But real musicians know where it came from.
But yeah,
but the most audiences don't.
No, the real musicians have to know, because the real musicians would. Well, I'll give you 3 reasons. 1, they were playing those songs to learn how to play the instrument. 2,
right.
They were covering those songs, and 3, they were also. They were also messed over like their counterpart black artists, and I just want to make one thing clear. when it comes to greed and cheating and things of that nature, there's no color but green, and a lot of people got jerked, and a lot of those musicians. I mean, you remember when Rolling Stones was exiled and had all types of problems, you know, and they named their group after Muddy Water song, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a horrible situation, but they do know. Now, do you play music at all?
I don't. I was not gifted with musical talents. You know, I tried singing, you know, years ago, but Aaron is a musician.
Yeah, we spoke about that. He's really humble about it. I was like, okay.
He's very, very good.
Yeah, I know. I think if I'm not mistaken, we spoke on the side. I told him he's one of these guys that'll tell you he can't play pool and leave with all your money. But anyway, when were you first introduced to the blues, and what made you, besides the movie and everything that you're doing, just you as a person, when you first introduced to it, and what made you just connect with it?
Well, I guess the first really introduction to the blues, I've always liked the blues, and when I was younger, I listened to, you know, the 60s music that everybody who thinks they know anything about music as a young child listens to, you know. And, you know, I grew up in the, you know, I was born in 1980, so I kind of grew up, you know, late 80s, early 90s music, and alternative and the grunge. And I just always knew that bands like Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, he had another band called Mad Season. And I loved that CD, and it was like a blues rock CD,
right,
essentially, you know? And, you know, so I always kind of knew about it. I just never really listened to actually straight up blues until, I don't know, about when I was maybe 25. I went to my first blues club. It was a 3 o'clock club in St. Louis, and, you know, we went there, and then you just hear that, and it just kind of takes over.
Yeah.
And it's more powerful than any. I'd been filming bands and stuff for years at that point, or, you know, I think I was 28 or 29, but this just affected me more emotionally or more powerfully than any other music I'd ever heard.
Absolutely, man. Look, Patrick, it was great chopping it up with you and talking about the blues, man.
Man, thanks for having me, brother. It was really great. Thanks for letting me talk about my movie. I mean, you know, any filmmaker will tell you I can talk about my movie all day.
You're supposed to, especially when, you know, you got a good story to tell that needs to be heard, and y'all heard that.
Well, it's not about me, man. It's about what we tried to honor with the film, and I hope we did a good job doing that.
Exactly. Where can the people find any information about America's Blues?
We have a website, www.americasbluesmovie.com, and make sure it's America's, not American. Everybody wants to put American Blues, but it's America's Blues. And on our site, there's information. I put up screenings as we get them, and any awards that we've won. You can learn about that. You can learn about the people that were involved in the film. And like we have, for instance, on our crew page, we have a short bio. I mean, there's only a couple of bios up there, but we have one from a world-famous artist who did a bunch of artwork for the Olympics, and he actually is the one that made our lovely logo design and our posters. So learn a lot of cool things. We have a store with just about anything you can think of. You can even buy pajamas with America's Blues on them. So, yeah, look us up, and I hope to see you all at the theater.
Groovy. Make sure y'all get there. All right, and, you know, we'll have you back in the future so we can catch up on what's going on at that time with the film.
That sounds good, man. Maybe I'll let you know when we come up to New York. We got a couple of screenings that we're working on up there, and see if we can't get out there.
Yeah, make sure you do that. Make sure you do that. All right, you guys have been bluesing. We're talking about the blues. We was talking to Patrick Branson about America's Blues, a very, very necessary movie that you guys need to see. And remember, if you don't do nothing, always keep God first and always keep on bluesing.